I received news that my father-in-law has terminal cancer. He said,
Since you're his son, you should figure out a way, even as a struggling, working-class couple.
my sister-in-law didn't bother visiting or being present during his final moments. My father-in-law had something he desperately wanted to give me, but when he handed it over, I was handed something outrageous.
There's one more thing that I've been hiding from you.
My name is Linda, and I'm 45 years old. I have been working as a part-time employee since my younger days. At a caregiving facility, I became a full-time employee a few years ago, and I have been working there ever since.
James and I grew closer after he received guidance during his early days, and we eventually got married after an office romance.
My husband James and I grew closer after he received guidance during his early days, and we eventually got married after an office romance. Our only son is now a university student living on their own. They have become independent, and I have fully dedicated myself to my work now. My mother-in-law passed away a few years ago due to cancer. Then one day we received the news that my father-in-law also had terminal cancer, which was inoperable.
I wonder if our family has a cancer-prone lineage. I should be careful too. I listened to James murmuring like that, and we headed to the hospital. Wait, where's my sister? Seriously? Again?
We met up with my father-in-law and entered the examination room to hear what the doctor had to say. Even though my sister-in-law Karen had been informed in advance by both James and me, on that day, she didn't show up for the doctor's discussion. When we later checked, we found that Karen had actually replied to the message. I couldn't believe my eyes as I saw that.
Why do I have to go and hear such things?
Just leave your sister alone. It's pointless to say anything to her.
Even so, your father-in-law is important. Maybe your sister-in-law just doesn't fully understand the situation.
She had actually replied to the message. Just leave your sister alone. It's pointless to say anything to her. Even though my sister-in-law Karen had been informed in advance by both James and me, she didn't show up for the doctor's discussion on that day. On that day, she did show up for the doctor's discussion.
No, it's inconvenient for you to come all of a sudden.
But Karen didn't let me into the house.
Do you understand the reason for my visit? If so, at least listen to what I have to say.
From behind her saying,
Just send that person away, quickly. Annoying.
despite the unpleasantness of Karen and her husband's attitude, in front of the entrance.
If it's about that, I already heard it over the phone. Was it necessary to come here and tell me in person?
Karen's words struck a nerve. I had intended to leave the matter to James since it was about my in-laws. But with the combination of her attitude, I couldn't help but speak up.
Your words are quite something, considering you can say that to your own parent in a difficult situation.
I don't want to deal with it. Didn't you work in caregiving? You're not suitable.
Just do your best as a struggling dual-income couple. Despite my persistence and plea for at least a little help from her, she didn't budge. Resigned, I made my way back home.
Just remember that there's not much time left for my father.
James's words echoed in my mind. Karen is a full-time homemaker, so we had planned to rely on her for daytime caregiving. While I found fulfillment in my job, I hesitated to quit as it meant giving up something valuable. However, with Karen rejecting the caregiving responsibility, that option was becoming precarious. That night, I found myself discussing it again with James.
If Karen and the others won't participate in caregiving, it means we as a couple have to take care of it ourselves, right?
I implicitly conveyed my intention to James that I wanted to take turns and participate in caregiving. Then James's eyes wandered and he said, Linda, I'm sorry. I don't intend to burden you with my father's caregiving, but if I also become fully occupied with that, we'll be in financial jeopardy. I support our household financially, so can't we find a way to rely on others? Are you suggesting that I should give up my job that I worked so hard to become a full-time employee?
I gave up my job to become a full-time employee. I can always return to work. But the time with my father-in-law is already limited. Leave it to me regarding my father-in-law.
With James's statement, I finally made up my mind.
Got it?
The next day, I explained the situation to my boss and offered to resign at the end of this month. And so the caregiving for my father-in-law began. The problem was not just the caregiving. We took on the caregiving responsibilities, and it put us in a financial bind. My father-in-law only had minimal insurance coverage and couldn't cover the miscellaneous expenses. I can't rely on Karen in that state. But my father-in-law frequently expressed his gratitude to me.
Heard you quit your job? I'm sorry and thank you. Rather, it's me, the daughter-in-law, who should apologize. Please don't hesitate to tell me anything.
When I said that, my father-in-law showed a relieved expression. On the first day of caregiving, I read a book and gave him a CD for my bookworm father-in-law. From that day on, I would complete the household chores every day and drive to the hospital, which took 30 minutes. James would also come to the hospital every day after work to check on my father-in-law's condition. My father-in-law never showed any signs of struggling with his treatment. However, as time passed, his condition deteriorated, and he had to start taking meals through a tube.
Hey sis, Dad doesn't have much time left, really. Can't you come and see him, even just for a moment?
Don't talk nonsense. What's the point of getting involved with someone who's gonna die? Just because I'm a housewife doesn't mean I have nothing to do.
James tried to convey the condition of my father-in-law to Karen several times, asking if she could come and visit, but he was turned down. Eventually, James started finishing work early to come to the hospital.
I tried to create time for James and my father-in-law to be alone together, so we spent our days killing time at the hospital store when James was around. One day when we returned home, James was in the hospital. Anyway, when we returned from the store, my father-in-law told me something.
Linda, thank you always. Though it may be small, I want you to be the beneficiary of my insurance policy.
So let's talk about this another time. Father-in-law, it must be difficult for you to speak. So let's talk about this another time.
Now I feel a bit at ease. Actually, I wanted to talk about it. Now. It was at that moment when my father-in-law said those words.
At that very calculated timing, the hospital room door was rudely opened, and Karen walked in.
Wait a minute. I can't allow someone else to be the beneficiary of the insurance. I absolutely won't let it happen.
Fine. Can I leave only this insurance for Karen then? Sign.
More easily than I had expected, my father-in-law yielded to Karen's words. I wasn't coming here for the money, but honestly, I thought Karen was being audacious. However, apart from the insurance money, let's give everything else to you and James as a couple.
Let's give everything else to you and James as a couple.
If Karen promises that she won't do anything for you and James in exchange for receiving the insurance money, then that's fine. What are you saying? That's more than enough. Besides, there's no other substantial property anyway, so I'll give everything to my brothers.
Karen, who was supposed to have come to visit, left these words behind and quickly went home.
As I watched Karen's back as she left, I couldn't help but feel puzzled and bewildered about why she had come to visit at this timing. James and the others were laughing in a strange manner. While James was understandable, it was surprising to see my father-in-law laughing so innocently. It was somewhat unexpected.
Karen fell for it completely.
I told her that there was an important matter from Father, and I contacted you in advance, sis.
Karen, well, she didn't even come when our mother was critically ill. She's a troublesome daughter. My father asked me to bring this from our family home.
Father asked me to bring this from our family home.
James said as he handed a locked safe to my father-in-law. Quietly to my father-in-law.
Quietly, my father-in-law opened it and took out a cash card from inside. He then handed it to James and me. This is the property other than the insurance money. I want you two to use it. I want you two to use it.
I looked at the balance in the passbook and I felt my legs go weak.
Why did you hide it all this time?
I didn't have any money, and I didn't want to burden you both even more.
I didn't want Karen to find out by us suddenly spending lavishly. After saying that, my father-in-law took a moment to catch his breath.
I wanted to give it to Linda, who took care of me despite my limited time left. Of course, since he's the eldest son, I had always planned to pass it on to him from the beginning. Linda, thank you so much for being with me.
As I listened to my father-in-law's heartfelt words of gratitude, my eyes welled up with tears. We had no reason to refuse, so we accepted the passbook from him. Soon after, my father-in-law's condition deteriorated even further. We informed Karen, but she never came to visit. As my husband and I watched over him, my father-in-law suddenly opened his eyes.
We have something important to tell you. Actually, there's one more thing I've been keeping a secret.
Determined not to miss my father-in-law's final words, we approached him closely. In truth, my father was a famous writer. I was born out of wedlock, so nobody knows. Gradually, within my father-in-law's words, there was a quiet, strained breath mixed in. My writer father left me a considerable fortune. My father-in-law mustered his last bit of strength and handed me a piece of notepaper. On that paper, an unfamiliar address was written. However, it was evident that it was a town where affluent people resided. When I fall asleep, go to this place. They will surely welcome you. With those words, my father-in-law closed his eyes slowly and peacefully drifted off to sleep. Until the end, Karen didn't participate in his care or assist with the funeral arrangements. However, later on, when Karen found out that we had inherited a substantial fortune, she became furious. She broke the promise she made with my father-in-law and stormed into our home.
This thief. It's not too late even now, so share it with us. In fact, consider it as compensation for all the trouble, and hand it all over.
Sis, cut it out. You've never done anything for Dad or Mom all this time, so what right do you have to say anything?
That pathetic insurance money. Who would be happy about it? You stay quiet. Don't even mention that pathetic insurance money. Who would be happy about it?
I must have become quite emotional as I ended up throwing a nearby coffee cup. In that moment, James instinctively shielded me and ended up injuring his head. She was making suspicious movements while driving. The police stopped her and informed her that there had been a report filed. After a while, Karen was taken away by the police. Karen resisted the police until the end, hurling verbal abuse. The police told her, "If malice is proven, your charges will become more severe." Karen finally calmed down. James had bleeding from his face, so it seems that it will be considered as an assault charge rather than a physical injury charge. Even if he is not indicted, James was determined to pursue a civil lawsuit at the very least. Our long yet short journey through caregiving issues and inheritance problems has come to an end. After my father-in-law passed away 3 months later, James and I arrived at the location mentioned in the final note we received.
At that place, there stood a magnificent mansion.
When we rang the doorbell, a woman came out from inside and she escorted us to the living room. The woman explained that this mansion had belonged to my father-in-law. This person had been working as an assistant while my father-in-law resided in this house, and she has been entrusted with the management of the mansion on a regular basis. After giving us a tour of the house, the assistant said, "This is from your father-in-law," and handed us an envelope before leaving.
Seems like something out of a drama, doesn't it? I said, exchanging glances with James.
When we opened the envelope, inside was a letter.
The letter consisted of about 2 pages, and to summarize its contents, it stated that we were free to do as we pleased with this mansion. If Karen were to find out about this, we were uncertain about what she might do, so we firmly pledged to keep it a secret from Karen. After that, I returned to work. Perhaps due to the shortage of caregivers, I have been surprisingly welcomed by my colleagues, which makes me happy. As for that house, we currently have no plans to use it as our residence. We intend to cherish it as precious memories with my father-in-law and protect it together.